morning, everyone. Welcome to Business Morning, 55 minutes of current and relevant business talks. I'm Ini John Mekwa. We start from the global space. As usual, crude oil prices fell in early Asian trade on Tuesday as investors lowered their demand growth expectations because of the ongoing trade war between the United States and China. These are the two biggest economies in the world. Brent for this morning lost 25 cents, and that's about 0.4% to $65.01 a barrel. WTI is also down 0.3%, $61.87 a barrel. U.S. President Donald Trump pushed to reshape world trade by imposing tariffs on all U.S. imports has created a high risk that the global economy will slip into recession this year. This is according to a lot of economists and a Reuters poll. China, hit with steepest of these tariffs, has responded with its own levies against U.S. imports, stoking a trade war between the two top oil-consuming nations, and that's prompted analysts to sharply lower their oil demand and price forecast. Barclays on Monday cut its 2025 Brent crude price forecast by $4 to $70 a barrel, citing elevated trade tensions and a pivot in production strategy by OPEC+, a group of drivers of about 1 million barrel per day supply surplus this year. Several members of OPEC+, which comprises the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries and their allies, will suggest an acceleration of output hikes for a second consecutive month in June, and that meeting is holding on Monday, May the 5th. Here in Nigeria, the central bank has announced significant revisions to the documentation requirement for transactions through the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPSS, and that's effective April 28th, that's yesterday. The changes aim to simplify cross-border transactions and boost intra-African trade for low-value transactions up to $2,000 for individuals and $5,000 for corporates. Only basic KYC and AML documents are required. The transactions above these thresholds will still require full documentation as per CBN's foreign exchange manual. Authorized dealer banks can now source foreign exchange for PAPSS settlement from the Nigerian market, bypassing the CBN. The Federal Inland Revenue Service, the FIRS, has directed banks to immediately identify and close all FIRS tax and levy collection accounts not authorized under the Tax Pro Max system. The Tax Pro Max is a homegrown tax administration platform that facilitates tax-related activities, including registration, filing, payment issuance of tax clearance certificates, and others. A public notice signed by the FIRS chairman, Zach Adedeji, and made available to newsmen by his special advisor on media, Dara Adekombi, said that the decision was part of the ongoing efforts to boost efficiency and transparency in tax collection, as well as ensure uniformity and seamless reconciliation of tax payments. The statement urges taxpayers and other stakeholders to reach out to the Revenue Accounting and Refund Department in FIRS for any clarifications or support regarding this directive. Well, that's the sound of the closing gong at the Nigerian exchange, and that was yesterday rung by the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, Dr. Jumoke Oduwole. The minister commends the NGX for its role in stabilizing the economy and attracting foreign investment, adding that the capital market remains a priority for the ministry. She also disclosed that the ministry has set a target to be raised from portfolio and foreign direct investments. Authority has announced that airports operating without valid permits will face sanctions from the first day in the year 2026. According to NCAA's Director of Aerodrome and Airspace Standards, Godwin Balang, only a few of the 92 airstrips listed valid permits and called for better cooperation between the NCAA and the Ministry of Aviation. NCAA's Director General Chris Najomo said that the agency is creating tailored regulations to support aviation growth while maintaining safety in line with the minister's 5-point agenda. A big boost for Nigeria's economy as non-oil exports hit $1.79 billion in the first quarter of 2025, and that's a 24.75% jump from $436 billion in the same period last year, and that's according to the Nigerian Export Promotion Council. The NEPC's Executive Director, Mrs. Noya Yeni, who made this known during a briefing in Abuja, said the growth shows Nigeria's economy is becoming less reliant on crude oil, with agriculture, manufacturing, and solid minerals driving the surge. She's also describing the U.S. 14% trade tariff as a chance for Nigeria to focus on adding value to its exports and boost global competitiveness.
Nigeria's non-oil products exported in the first quarter of 2025 were valued at $1.791 billion. This is a 24.7% increase over and above $1.436 billion reported in the first quarter of the year 2024. The volume also increased to 2.416 million metric tons, which is an increase from 1.937 million metric tons recorded in the first quarter of 2024. The top 20 products exported in the first quarter of 2025, cocoa and its derivatives, including cocoa butter, cocoa liquor, cocoa cake, came first, followed by urea and fertilizer, cashew nuts, sesame seed, gold dust, aluminum ingots, copper ingots, soya beans, rubber, amongst others. Regarding the USA tariff, for us, just like anything in the world, it's not, we see it as, in a way, as positive. The reason is that it calls for us to diversify. Diversification in terms of number of products, which has also resonated in my presentation. I said for the first quarter, quarter on quarter, we grew in terms of number of products.
All right, so that's talking about non-oil export. Let's see if we can touch a bit on that. That's improvement with Senior Associate with Financial Derivatives Company, Dumebi Oduwole, right here in the studio. Dumebi, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. Good morning, Ini.
So that was NEPC celebrating the first quarter non-oil exports, which they say increased by 24.75. Well, it sounds like good news. We've been talking about diversifying the economy for a bit. I wonder if this number should be what we should celebrate, you know, at this time. You know, but, you know, now the world is talking about the tariff and the need to add value to our raw materials, cocoa, agriculture, and beyond agriculture. So I wonder if we are starting that journey. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I would say we're actually starting it. We're on a path where, like, I think from the beginning of this year and even from the beginning of 2024, you know, we have been on a reform path. And with reforms come strategic, you know, decisions and strategic changes to economic diversification. And one of the things that we have seen the federal government embark on is an increase in infrastructure development. There's a strategic focus on attracting long-term capital. And we're also seeing a strategic focus on boosting, you know, the non-oil sector of the economy and at least its contribution to GDP growth. Now, the magnitude at which this is happening is where a lot more conversations need to happen, and what commodities we're exactly, adding value and focusing on, because we can't be where we were, in the 1950s, where we're still producing cassava, yes, but how much value are we adding to that, and what markets are we exporting to? And that's where the conversation around the tariffs now also coming. Before we even get into that, I think we also need to situate what is happening right now with the value, the nominal value of the increase in non-oil exports versus vis-a-vis the naira. Because when the naira is depreciated, right, or devalued, or a currency is devalued, what it means is that the value of your exports become a lot more, right? So, and I think that's one of the major things that have also contributed to this rise, because we also saw that with oil exports. Remember from the Q4 GDP numbers that we saw. So some of those things, and even the trade numbers that we saw a significant impact of the naira devaluation on the value of our export earnings. So where I think we need to focus more is on the value addition aspect and the strategic commodities that we are increasing or adding value towards and saying what we're exporting.
Yeah, so I guess that's why there's the raw materials research and development bill and all the talks around that, because there's a segment of the society and economists who say you don't just wake up and say and compel everybody to add 30% when you have not built the capacity, you understand, for that. So there's that. So even though we are desperate for this addition of value, it does seem we still have some homework to do before we can make it a law, at least from what economists are saying.
Yeah, that's very, very true. In that sense, I think it's extremely important for us to look at the process by which we even say we want to focus on this value addition. Like I said, if we say we want to focus on agriculture and in industry, right? What segments are we focusing on? So what commodities are we focusing on? For instance, from our GDP numbers, from our trade data, we do see sesame seeds as one of the major agriculturally traded products or commodities. We also see cashew, we see cocoa. But within these commodities, right, there's a whole list of them. We even have ginger as part of that.
Yeah, I know ginger is popping up really good these days.
So the question now is, are there markets for these commodities? If there are markets for this commodity, what exactly is the market size? Like doing a proper feasibility study, both domestically, regionally, and globally. And if the market size is enough for us to tap into based off of our reserves of these commodities, then we now need to focus on how can we be competitive in our production of these commodities and how much value we're going to add, because comparative advantage and competitive advantage is the strategic thing, right? We do not want to spend a lot more cost producing the raw material and even producing the goods, the finished goods, than how much we're going to sell. Because if our prices are not competitive,
then we lose out in the market.
Exactly. So if we're going to reduce the cost of production, want to reduce the cost of production, how much more does government need to come in to support the industries or support the growth of these commodities? And I'm a very big believer in state governments actually focusing on the commodities that they do have comparative advantage in. And God has blessed Nigeria so much.
Every part of the country.
Every part of the country has something, right? So it doesn't solely rest on the federal government. It more so, from my own perspective, and we've seen other countries like the US excel with this template. We've seen China excel with this template. We've seen Malaysia excel with this template. State governments that do have a lot of these resources need to look inward and attract capital so that they're able to boost production. So now it becomes an inductive approach towards economic growth, where we're starting from the small to get to the big. We don't have to wait for the federal government. We don't have to wait for fact disbursements. From each state, we should be able to attract long-term capital. And it's very interesting to see that we have been getting a lot of private capital activities into Nigeria. And interestingly, it's very targeted towards technology, agriculture, and industries. So if state governments are able to do a lot more, we should be able to see a lot more, companies set up in the agricultural space. Lagos State is doing one of the things with the Lagos Agri Innovation Club. We're seeing a lot more things coming up supporting.
Yeah, they actually got the Fitch upgrade for investment.
Exactly. So doing things like that will further encourage private capital, because again, we're not just looking for private capital that would come in 2 months and
make
it's
profits
out.
and
we
out.
need long-term capital.
Yeah, so maybe the interesting thing about what you're saying is, I had a conversation yesterday that, sometimes you just want to, I'm not just a journalist, I'm actually a Nigerian kind of talk, and I had that kind of talk yesterday because we're talking about agriculture and the government has this new initiative, NAPM, that's supposed to get about $1.1 billion working with Brazil, the 774 local government areas.
Yes.
And there are programs that are supposed to bring focus into maybe a local government for a product. I've had conversations of such here, but sometimes it does seem like we have these great ideas. I mean, imagine if, for instance, the government was to work with the ministry or the local government or the state government to say, you have 20 local government areas in specialty of this, you want fertilizer, you want tractor, let's focus on that. You can imagine that private sector will be drawn to that to add value. You have factories. We're talking about ginger, for instance. Now, to process it, to capture it, there's always a market out there. But, I mean, we have these interesting talks, and it just seems like that's it.
That's it. I do understand where the sentiments are coming from. I think one of the things that we cannot do is to stop talking about these things so that we're drawing awareness to it. But more importantly, I think this is where we need to understand the importance of the important link between politics and economy, right? Within the political economy, there's an intricate balance that has to be. And that's where, if the political economy is not working well, we will see private capital, and we will see the private side of the economy, right, just lay low, and everybody's trying to focus on doing what they can do, rather than having like a synergy between the public sector. And that's where public-private partnership always comes in. And more importantly, I think this is where conversations around having educated people at the lower tier of the government, right? It's extremely important that we're not just looking at governance from the top, we're also looking at it from the bottom. Because imagine you have a local government chairman that is not very conversant with the resources that a local government has, or how well to equitably distribute those resources. And I do think it's an endemic problem that we have currently in the country where, at the lower tier of governance, it doesn't trickle down because there's not so much education, there's not so much sensitization. And the people that really know how to do what needs to be done are not because they're not willing to do it, but there's a lot of politicizing happening with that. And I think that's where we need to sit down and have conversations strictly about governance and how well to ensure that the right kinds of people are leading and the right kinds of people are inserting offices. Because we can have bright ideas, but if execution and implementation and monitoring continues to be our problem, then we will continue to have these conversations. We've seen this happen so many times, even with CBN initiatives, right? So we just need to have those conversations. Yeah,
maybe, I mean, we just went off track what was planned for today, but I mean, when you bring that up, it just poses another problem. So we are talking about the economy, but we forget that the economy is going to be run. Policies are going to be initiated and implemented by human beings. And now, if you don't get the right human beings into those positions, if it's all about politics, then, we tend
to lose out.
Exactly. And we do have the brains, but if you have the brains and not the connection in Nigeria, it does seem like, your brain would just would die underutilized. But I mean, let's try to pivot a bit and see. Yesterday we saw the Naira gain in the parallel market. That should be good news, Yes,
I mean, it's good news. I mean, anytime the Naira gains, it's good news for everyone.
Especially in the parallel market, because that's where most people are able to access it.
Yes. So it's very good. We're also seeing that the Naira, the official market and the parallel market rates are beginning to be, converge a lot more. So the gap between the official rate and the parallel market rates is becoming closer. And that's good for businesses, it's good for manufacturers, it's good for even consumers in general, because by the time, we're trying to get our petrol at the filling stations and things like we're trying to buy food from the market or get things from supermarkets, the appreciation of the Naira should be something that, or it is something that would eventually all feel. The expectation or the plan now, or what what generally businesses and consumers would hope for is a sustained appreciation of the naira, because if it is wobbly, what it means is that businesses can't necessarily plan, and businesses would necessarily not change.
But maybe we seem to
approach.
have just, gone from 1,005 to 1,006, and we're staying there and we're comfortable. I hope this is not how we're going to get to 1,007 and then we're just and then move to 1,008, because some of us are still praying for 1,200.
I mean, it's not wrong to pray for 1,200. I think when we look at the fundamentals back in the naira, right, we did expect from the beginning of the year this bumpy ride between 1,500 to 1,700. Actually, we did expect that oscillation, and it's not wrong to expect it, because the markets will eventually need to stabilize. There are a lot more things like production capacity, the supply of naira, foreign exchange inflows, FPI inflows, all of those things, market sentiments, credit rating downgrades or upgrades, as the case may be, and how all of these things eventually play, to impact the value of the naira, right? We're also seeing the global exchange, the global trade war. We're seeing global dynamics, monetary policy changes. The expectation going into the year was that the US was going to, begin to, cut rates.
Gave us another pill to swallow.
So we're not necessarily seeing that happen as much, and so on the frontier market side, which Nigeria falls into, we also have to be very, very cautious with that, because we want to keep foreign exchange inflows pouring in. So again, it's just one of those periods where we just have to take it as it is and just keep watching all of the various factors that keep impacting the naira. But one thing that we are certain about is that the CBN will continue to do what needs to be done to keep the naira stable, to keep the markets friendly, to continue to instill market confidence, business confidence, and investor confidence. And all of that would eventually play out positively.
All right, we look forward to that. Although we can simply say that the CBN has done a lot of work, even if it's just the mergence, between the parallel and the official market so far. But thank you so much, Senior Associate with Financial Derivatives Company, Dumebi Oduwole. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll just continue on this trajectory, especially talking about the trade war and the tariffs. That's our next conversation after the break. Do stay with us here on Business Morning. Back to watching Business Morning here on Channels Television. We're still looking at Nigeria's economy, and especially after that, do we say impressive number from NEPC, the non-oil export. But the other aspect is perhaps some factors affecting those exports at this time, and it's the global trade war. That's no longer news. President Trump has been dishing it out to us. Nigeria, for instance, has 14%. But let's find out, how much impact it's having on the Nigerian economy with the Managing Director of Capital Plus Limited, Mr. Oluwaseyi Odufowa, right here in the studio. Mr. Odufowa, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Trump has been trumping the world. But I mean, even the WTO DG talked about this, and she seemed to be more optimistic, at least for the African continent. So even though we have 10%, 14% from the continent.
This line.
Yes. The conversation is that this is an opportunity for Africa to look inwards. We have more than 1 billion markets within ourselves. How much of a trade do we do with the U.S., for instance? We saw China, Japan lower their currencies to make their exports cheaper and all of that. So doesn't this give us more of a good or some benefits than punishment?
Okay, so in my view, I remember the last time I was here, I made it very clear that a Trump presidency will have a lot of misgivings, in global trade. Trump is more of a bilaterally minded person, more than a multilaterally minded person. So he believes in transactions rather than growth, a global growth. So, and he campaigned for America first, And that is what we are seeing today. This tariff war that we have seen globally is just a representative for those things that he wishes for the U.S. economy. We look at trade in general. We look at migration, and we should look at national security. And to be able to achieve all of those, there must be a global disruption. And that is what Trump is trying to do, just to place America first in every table of negotiations. And when he started with a baseline, like you mentioned, between 10 and 14% globally. But along the line, for those countries that he sees as more of a threat to the U.S., most especially China, and that's why you see that it rose as high as 145%, retaliatory measures at 225% in terms of tariff. But look at the African market. Like you asked, how much of this market affects, how much of the U.S. market affects Africa, and how much of African export goes to the U.S.? Before now, we know African presidents, we go cap in hand, most times to the U.S., IMF, World Bank, Paris Club, and every other multinational to beg for aid, to beg for funds, and that is what has stopped. I used to say that, in my own view, as an economist, tariffs is good. Global trade war is good. It's healthy. It's a healthy war because it makes you go back home and think outside of the box. It makes you to sit down and look at what are the cushions we have around us. If the U.S. is not there, if you are not trading with the U.S., what advantage, comparative advantage, do we have globally? And it makes you to begin to look inward in your own fiscal policies to grow your own economy. Nigeria as a country, what can we speak for ourselves at the moment? 90% of our FX earning from export, FX export earnings is from crude. And that's why you will say that it may not really affect us, you know, going down the line. But look at this now. Our benchmark for crude is $75 per barrel. That's our benchmark. And that's what we use in basing our 49 trillion budget. And now, as we speak, it's about $63. So that deficit, that margin, how do we cover for it? Is it by more borrowings? Is it by taxing Nigerians more? Or is it by lowering government spending? How do we manage it? Because it will definitely affect on the long run. Look at now, the agri sector and non-oil producing sector is going to be affected. There's no doubt. Though, like I said, 90% of our earnings is based on crude, but it will be affected. And how will Nigeria come out of it? If I will go straight into that for the discussion. You know, the Minister of Trade and Investment must, you know, begin to think out of the box as we speak. You know, recently, Mr. President set up a committee to look at our trade policy. The last time it was reviewed was in 2002. So, you know, that lag has been there. So if not for the U.S., you know, disrupting global markets now, what are we going to be talking about? So for Nigeria as a country, I think, you know, for long-term solutions, we should look inwards. And in looking inwards, we must look at our fiscal policies. We must rejig it so that it can solve our problems. And the major problem...
What part of the fiscal policy?
I'll get there.
Okay.
So one of the major problems we have is production. Nigeria is not a producing economy. We are a mono economy, fully dependent on oil exports. And that's what we have. And I tell you, there are research that says that in the next 60 years, our wells may dry up. I'm not saying it's going to dry, may dry up. So where are we going to be looking at? Okay, probably now presidents that are coming in will say that it's not going to be my time. I will survive Nigeria and move forward. But what of the future of this country? So part of it, like I said, is production. How are we going? We must begin to produce. That is the solution. You know, we must industrialize Nigeria, and that's the only way to grow. We must begin to export, shift away from oil export to fully non-oil export. You know, once we have that balance, then we can grow. Now, look at our SME sector, about 58 to 59% of GDP. How well is it growing as we speak? In terms of employment, in terms of creating effects, expanding, spending, how are we growing? And to get it right, that's why I said fiscal policies. We must look at security. We must look at electricity. These are very, very vital areas that will, propel growth by helping us to produce more. And, anything apart from this will only be dependent. So once there's a volatility in the international market, it will affect Nigeria.
So what about those who say that what
Yes.
we should actually start with should be blocking the leakages? You talked about, government adjusting its expenditure,
Yes.
even if it's for 2025, even though we already have our budget.
Yes.
When you look at that from that perspective, blocking the leakages, cutting down on expenditure, do you agree that that's we call it low-hanging fruit that we could handle or deal with at this time when crude oil prices are dwindling?
Well, I'll agree with you, and that's why I mentioned it, that where will government look at? Because the U.S. global tariff war is affecting oil prices as we speak. And lowering to 63, it may even come down further. And that's why IMF, World Bank, they've lowered their expectations in terms of growth all around the world. They've lowered it. Nigeria, our expectation for 2024 was to grow at 2.9%. We ended up growing at about 3.4%. I mentioned it here. And at the end of the day, now growth has been lowered again to about 2.9%, even though our budget benchmark for growth, GDP growth, is 4.6%. Super high, and I don't see how we want to meet up with that. And so to look at it in context, government spending, I will always advocate for governments to reduce its spending, but how much of it, in terms of percentage, will affect our growth if we want to look at it, realistically. Government will always tell you, okay, we are going to reduce our salaries, but not total emolument, but they will say salaries, we are going to cut down on this, but in actual sense, how many governments have been able to do that holistically? What are they going to cut holistically? So if you say
what about ministries and agencies?
Well, if you want to cut down on that, well, I don't know how it will affect a government in its first term in office. You know what I mean? That's the political side. I'm not the politician, so I won't go there.
We're going to politics again.
No, I won't go into politics. But as an economist, when we are looking at growth, we are looking at middle-term and long-term growth. But sincerely, what will give us a good standing and good shocks around global market is just going to be centered around, our fiscal policy that we need to rejig. And by rejigging it, there are certain components that must be put in place fully. We can't joke with electricity if we want to grow.
But you see, the thing with this, these things you've talked about.
Yes.
Infrastructure.
Yes.
Insecurity.
Yes.
They seem to be long-term. And
yes.
For Nigeria, it's a conversation we've been having for a very long time.
True.
So do you see things being different now? Well,
I'll say that Mr. President has been seen as taking the bull by the horn. He's a president that has the full balls to go all the way, and he has demonstrated it right from his emergence in 2023. And sincerely, the Nigerian market believes in his strides to give us that change that we desire. When he came in, total removal of fuel subsidy, I said total, because over time, we've had it come back. So total removal of subsidy, fuel subsidy, floating of the Naira, it takes a lot of balls to be able to do that. And we found out that Naira gained its balance in the market at about 1,500, 1,600. And we already know that that is the real global exchange level, not as at when it was around 400.
So you think this 1,006 we're working with is the fair value of the Naira?
It's the fair value of the Naira. That is where Naira has come to stabilize. That is the equilibrium point.
Don't forget that a few weeks ago it was on 1,005.
No, that's what I'm saying. It fluctuates between that 1,516. It depends on global pressures too. So now that oil prices is dwindling, it will affect the naira. Oil prices go up, naira will balance. And that is what we are talking about, that Nigeria does not have internal shocks. We depend on the global market to survive because we are not a producing nation. And that's where I'm trying to go back to. So if you look at some of these policies, there's no two ways about it. You know, Peter Obi will always say that we must move from consumption to production. That is pure economics, and it's true. We must move to production, and if we do not produce, there's no way.
So do you see things being different now? Because we're talking about the capacity to produce, the infrastructure.
Let me start with electricity that I mentioned earlier. About 3 governments successively average at about 5,000 megawatts. As we speak, according to the Minister of Power, he has told us that Nigeria is currently on about 6,000 to 6,500. And before the end of the first tenure of this government, we should be running at about 8,000 megawatts, which is an increase. Imagine if every government adds about 1,000 megawatts to the national grid in the last 15 years. We should be talking of close to 30,000 megawatts right now. And for a good sustainability of electricity in this country, for SMEs to grow, we still need about 40 to 50,000 megawatts. So electricity must grow. And if government commits itself more into that sector, we should grow averagely. And if you have electricity, everybody is busy. It cures unemployment. It increases spending, local spending. And once spending is increased, it makes your economy more robust. And if you look at it, so if you add those two together, coupled with the fact that it will also curb insecurity at a level, because an idle hand is a devil's workshop. People will get to work, and there will be productivity across the country. And once there's productivity, it increases GDP. And so we must look at it. It's a chain. And once we begin to solve it directly, Nigeria will have a global benchmark. And once again, to the Minister of Trade, we need to begin to think outside of the box. Look at the AGOA agreement that we have with the US. How well have we used it?
That's expiring in September.
I know. Before now, how well did we use that window for export? You know, free duty, free everything. How well did we use that window?
Now we have AFCFTA.
Oh, yes. So if you look at it, Africa as in general may not suffer directly as we speak in this global tariff war, but Nigeria as an economy, because there are no shocks, because we have been idle for a very long time, there's no way it will affect us because we depend solely on oil for our foreign effects to come into the country.
So once again, we're talking about diversification.
Yes.
A message that we've been preaching for many years. But thank you so much, Managing Director, Capital Plus Limited, Oluwaseyi Odufuwa. Thank you for your time and your views.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right, we're still talking about the tariffs, but now let's take it to the U.S. Part and find out how they are coping with it. Talking about Americans who are residents in America. So they say the U.S. president has given governments across the world a headache. That is no longer news. And there's a report now saying that Americans are beginning to feel the impact of this. And we know from the president, that's President Donald Trump's many talks, that the plan is to attract the manufacturers into America so that to boost economic activities and also create jobs. Now let's talk to someone who is in the United States. Dr. Malcolm Fabi. Dr. Malcolm Fabi is a climate technology and sustainability expert, but today he speaks to us, you know, beyond this to tell us how they are feeling this trade tariff, U.S. tariff, and all. Dr. Fabi, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Nini. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Great. So are consumers in the U.S. feeling this trade war that's going on around you?
So I'll separate it into 3 markets. So there's the retail market, what happens in grocery stores. There's the stock market, where, you know, obviously company stocks and equities are traded. And then there's the bond market, which is obviously affects mostly corporate entities and governments a lot more. You might be surprised to hear that in the retail markets, inflation has not hit the shelves yet, although there's an expectation that the tariffs would lead to higher prices. So here in the US, in March, inflation levels were about 2.4%, lower than the 2.8% that the values were in February. So actually here, month to month, and compared to previous years, inflation fell in March, which might be a little surprising to folks. But the expectation is that part of the reason why those higher prices haven't yet began to emerge is that the tariffs have just been placed, right? So Liberation Day for tariffs was April 2nd, and if tariffs are going to impact what is happening in the retail space, you would expect that those goods that are being tariffed would first arrive at port, then the tariffs would kick in, and what those tariffs would translate to would be higher prices. Now, where the impact of the tariffs have immediately been seen is in the stock markets. And so in the stock markets, as you I'm sure already know, there was a $10 trillion loss over the last 1 month in the stock markets as the market began to price in the impact of tariffs. And if you think about what a stock price means, a stock price in principle, when you go back to financial theory, is simply the present value of future cash flows. So if a stock price is the present value of future cash flows, the future cash flow is just profits to a company. What are a company's profits? A company's profits are its net revenues less its costs. And if a tariff is a higher cost, then what that obviously means is that future profits will go down. If future profits go down, then the net present value, the current value of those future profits is going to be less. And that's why you immediately saw that as the rollout of tariffs was done, stock markets began to crash because the markets began to price in the impact of those lower future potential profits. Higher prices in the stores means less people will likely buy. Higher tariff levels means less companies will be able to bring in shipments from the various companies where they're bringing those in. And then the other impact we saw obviously was in the bond markets. The bond market saw about a 10% increase in yield. And the implication of that is that it is the bond markets where companies borrow from, where governments basically borrow from, US Treasury yields in this case in the US. Those markets, as I said, the yields went higher, and higher yields generally means higher interest rates from the Federal Reserve. Higher interest rates would mean the rates at which you borrow to purchase a car, to purchase a house, all those rates would go up. And so the expectation, as I indicated earlier, is that the retail market, where goods and services are being traded and bought by everyday people in stores, in car shops and things like that, the expectation is that that would begin to kick in the April, May timeframe. So we're in April, once the inflation numbers come around in April, we are likely to see that prices have actually ticked up and inflation might actually begin to tick up as the tariffs begin to have an impact.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Fabi, for that, very elaborate picture you have painted there. But, amidst all of this, some economist polls were done on how President Trump has handled the economy since he got into the Oval Office or into the White House. And there weren't very friendly figures that came out of that. But just the first-hand information from your community, what are the conversations about his handling of the economy?
So you're right. The latest polls that came out basically indicated that that President Trump was less than 40% in terms of the ratings that the American people had in terms of his handling of the economy. This is about a 15% drop from where he was in November. The reality is that the US elections, the last elections, turned largely on the economy. The expectation that Mr. Trump would boost the economy. And a lot of that was based on expectations that there might be reductions in taxes. Again, obviously, if taxes reduce, people have more money to spend. If they have more money to spend, there's more activity in the marketplace. And if companies are also paying lower taxes, then in principle, their cash flows are higher, stock prices would go up. And so one of the things that actually happened in November was that the US stock market went to record high levels once Mr. Trump won that election with those expectations. I think what a lot of people have been surprised by is the impact of tariffs, the way the tariffs were rolled out, the messaging around tariffs. So the messaging around tariffs was, there was a debate around, is a tariff a tax or is a tariff a tax cut? The reality is a tariff is a tax. And so if you don't message that correctly, as people have an expectation that a tariff means things might be better for them, when in reality, there is a short-term price to pay, and even perhaps a long-term price to pay. So the short-term price to pay is a tariff is a tax. A tariff just means when goods come to port, there is a higher price placed on those goods and services to enter into whatever nation is imposing those tariffs. And who pays the tariffs? Well, the tariffs end up being a pass-through. So if I pay 10% more to clear my goods, you can expect that my customers will pay somewhere between 0 to 10% to reflect the fact that my prices are higher, as long as I'm trying to retain some profits. So what has happened for the US consumer is, most US consumers would have, apart from the impact that they would have in the retail stores if they go to retail stores, many US households would tend to hold holdings in the equity markets. So a lot of people have, stock. In fact, in the US, things like pensions are typically held in what we call 401ks over here. So many pension funds actually place those funds in the stock market. And so when things like tariffs have an immediate impact in the stock markets, where you had over $10 trillion of loss in the US alone over the last 1 month due to the tariffs, and about $30 trillion worldwide, roughly coming to about 20% of value. That has an immediate impact on people. It has an immediate impact on their spending capacity. It has an immediate impact in their overall holdings. It has an immediate impact in their concerns about the economy, an immediate impact in terms of their ability to spend. And that's what you're seeing reflected in the polls, that the polls, again, they're the lowest that Mr. Trump has had in his political career, I think, and certainly one of the lowest over the last 70 years when a presidency approaches its first 100 days. So there are certainly headwinds, and I'm sure what is happening right now is that there's a recalibration of the tariff strategy that's beginning to take place, where the government has stepped back and has put in a 90-day hold in order to begin working out trade deals. And I would say that there probably is some opportunity for countries like Nigeria to take advantage of this situation. We've already started seeing some reports that companies, for instance, a number of Chinese companies that have assembly plants in Nigeria. So rather than push the products from China, where you are likely to be hit with a 145% tariff, well, why don't you increase your production in a place like Nigeria, where the tariff level is no more than 14%? That's a huge difference. A 145% tariff means the goods that are coming from China to the US at a 145% tariff level would be over 2 times their price, their current prices. If those goods were coming from Nigeria at a 14% level, because a Chinese company or some other company from a company that was hit with significantly high tariffs, if such high tariff levels remain, then there would be a strategic advantage to actually begin to rethink the geographic location of where manufacturing takes place. And again, I think this is an incredible opportunity for a place like Nigeria, where labor rates are remarkably low. We have a very highly mobile, highly intelligent, highly motivated, well-educated, young workforce. Our labor rates are comparable, and in fact, when you compare them to places like China and Asia, extremely low. So there is an advantage, and I'm hoping that the Nigerian government and private entities would begin to take advantage of this reshaping and restructuring of global economics that offers potentially significant opportunities for Nigeria.
All right, certainly we do hope that too. And yes, you shared that video with me off air. And well, I do hope that it's for real and Chinese companies, for instance, will increase their production in Nigeria because that will mean more jobs and more economic activities. So thank you so much for your time, Dr. Malcolm Fabi, climate technology and sustainability expert, for staying up this early from the United States to join on the program.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, well, we're almost out of time, but a poll shows that China's factory activity will likely contract in April, and it's of course because of the tariff from President Donald Trump. A Reuters poll of 30 economists forecast the official purchasing managers index will come at 49.8%, and that, is lower than 50, which is a progressive number. Still in China, Evergrande Group Chairman Hui Keqiang plans to refuse disclosing details of his assets. Its liquidators share this, that is likely complicating efforts to wind up the defaulted builder to pay back creditors. Evergrande was in the news earlier in the year, and it brought down a major part of the Chinese economy. Now the CEO says he will not disclose his assets. A bit of good news from China. Trip numbers are set to reach a 3-year post-COVID high during China's upcoming May Day public holiday. The first day, that's on May, the Thursday, I beg your pardon, the first day in May. The holiday begins May 1, lasts for 5 days. It's a prime time for travel, and they hope to get some revenue from that. The Deutsche Bank has posted a 39% rise in the first quarter profits after its, that's the HSBC. They have also announced a share buyback, a huge number that they want to do. And then the Deutsche Bank has also announced a 39%. Mixing up right there. Let's leave the banks alone and go to the country. Germany's consumer sentiment improved further heading into May as the prospects of a new government appear to soothe households, countering some of the uncertainty unleashed by tensions over import tariffs. Remember, in Germany, they're expecting a new government in a couple of days, less than a week, I believe, and the expectation and willingness to buy more showed noticeably. So Germans are getting more comfortable and expecting some good days with a new government that's coming on board. And then in Greece, Greece is asking the European Commission to exempt its 2026 defense spending from the EU's budget rules as part of the fiscal escape clause. The minister is asking for that. The country will submit a request later on, seeking to exempt spending worth about 500 million euros from the bloc's plan. All right, so that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for being a part of Business Morning. Hope it was worth your time. 55 minutes of current and relevant business talks. We have updates for you at 1 p.m. That'll be during Business Incorporated. Let's do it again then.